On my bike ride today, I'm highlighting various sites related to the story of race, religion, and ethnicity in Birmingham because I'm teaching a course on that in the spring or in the fall, and students are starting to register for it this week, I hope. So we need enough students to register for it to make, and that's part of the reason why I'm going on this bike ride. I'm here on Samford's campus in front of what's known as the Reconciliation Memorial, or I might say Reconciliation Monument, that Samford put up last year to acknowledge its past complicity in slavery and in segregation, and to honor two of its African American members of the community, Harry, an enslaved man, and Audrey Gaston, who was the first African American graduate of Samford. Here at our next stop, I want to talk about Samford's campus itself. It's built in Georgian colonial revival architecture, which they decided on back when they purchased the land in the 1940s. So what did this red brick, white column, white trim style of architecture mean at the time? Well, in Reed Chapel, they wanted it to mean religious liberty and Baptist identity, so they made that a copy of First Baptist Church Providence. More broadly, it meant democracy in America at the time, but it also meant Old South, and they were quite explicit about that when they built this campus. And Old South meant gentility and refinement and hospitality, but all of that was built on a white-dominated, race-based society. And so that's part of the legacy that was invoked at the time, and it's something we have to acknowledge and deal with today. This stop features 3 African American Protestant churches in Homewood's Rosedale neighborhood. The oldest church building in Homewood is what you're looking at right now, Union Missionary Baptist Church. Friendship Baptist Church, which is just up the hill, was formed later from members from Union Missionary Baptist Church. And Metropolitan AME, which is on the other side of that big road, you can just see its cross behind one of the telephone poles there, is basically as old, just a little bit younger than Union Missionary here. The fact that there's so many churches speaks to the fact that this was a large African American community, and churches tended to be fairly small and family-based. Also, churches in the African American community provided a chance for leadership, and the more churches you had, the more opportunities for leadership. Race and religion in Homewood is about more than race, religion, and ethnicity in Homewood is about more than just African Americans and whites. However, at least historic African American migrations from the 19th century. Here is St. John Kami Coptic Orthodox Church, founded in 1994 by Christian immigrants from Egypt. This is just one block up from Friendship Baptist Church. Our last stop in Homewood, at least for the first part of our journey, is the cornerstone of the old Our Lady of Sorrows Church. This was on the south side. We'll be going there in a little bit. And it was originally, when it was founded in 1887, a German-speaking parish. It was the second Catholic parish in central Birmingham, and it was for German speakers. So that's another important part of the story of ethnicity and religion. And then in the 1940s, when the church burned, they relocated the church here to Homewood and built a new church. Now, Our Lady of Sorrows, like so many Catholic churches in northern Alabama, has been served oftentimes in recent decades by priests from all around the world, particularly places in Africa, in India. And a lot of Catholic churches are multi-ethnic, and some even substantially multiracial. So that's another important part of our story. I'm now over in the city of Birmingham on the campus of UAB, right outside its basketball arena. And you might ask, what does this have to do with race and religion? Well, this was once a neighborhood, and Our Lady of Sorrows, it was right here where I'm standing, that cornerstone was. And when they moved to Homewood, Bishop Fulton Sheen gave money for that church to be rebuilt, because it had been burned, and to be renamed for Our Lady of Fatima. And the congregation that was previously known as Immaculate Conception, which was down the street, moved here. And so that congregation was African American. We may see their church later, their current church. And this was a thriving African American religious community, neighborhood with lots of churches, but now they've all moved out. And Lauren Center and I mapped where they moved to the other semester when she was looking at one of the churches over in the Avondale area that used to be here. An important part of Birmingham's ethnic Christian diversity for over 110 years has been the Arab Christian community from Lebanon and Syria. They have two churches here in the Glen Iris community, St. Elias Maronite Church, and you can see that they have Arabic inscription over the front door of this building, built in 1959, and two cornerstones or name stones, one of which is written in what I assume is Arabic as well. Both of these churches are Catholic in full communion with the Pope, but they have their own liturgical rites. The Maronite Church is a distinctive rite from Lebanon. The Melkite Church, St. George's, around the corner, worships the way Eastern Orthodox do. And these churches played an important role in the story of race in Birmingham, in sort of a middle position between whites and blacks, and we look forward to exploring that. This stop is a railroad crossing. Railroads play an important role in the story of America and in the story of race and religion. They enabled lots of African Americans from the South to journey north in the Great Migration and establish African American churches in the north of different varieties than were there earlier. And they metaphors for ability in a lot of African American piety and others. And they were also, railroad tracks are often barriers. While there's no train on these crossings right now, I've often been here and I can't cross from Glen Iris into Titusville this way because a train is parked on the tracks. But today I can, and this is very much a railroad crossing that separates two sides of the tracks, a historically white community from a historically African American community. Elmwood Cemetery is one of Birmingham's major cemeteries, perhaps the largest of the older ones, and it was historically white, all white. But my student Emma Welch, in a course 3 semesters ago, was researching the story of Catholics in African American Catholics in Birmingham, particularly around Our Lady of Fatima Church, and told the story of the first African American man to be buried here, who was a Catholic layman, a Vietnam veteran who had died in the war, and his family wanted him to be buried here, and it took a court case to force Elmwood to allow him to be buried here. And so in the end he was, and other African Americans have been buried here in the decades since. There are lots of African American churches here in the western part of Birmingham where I am now, each one with its own unique story. I've stopped here at Greater Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church because this is the church that Emma Buckles is going to be profiling their worship services for our Magic City Religion website, which she helps me run as my assistant. And Emma and I were meeting for advising yesterday, and she asked me what I was going to do this weekend, and I said, I don't know, go for a bike ride or grade. And I ran a Twitter poll, and my colleagues said, go for a bike ride and film these sites. So that's what I'm doing, and here's your church, Emma. I'm now in the Wylam neighborhood of Birmingham, and I've stumbled across a beautiful 1926 Gothic Revival church built by the M.E. Church South, the Methodist Episcopal Church South. So the congregation was founded in 1888, and this church was built in 1926. Now this building has a lot to do with the history of race and religion too, because of course the Methodist Episcopal Church South split from the Methodist Episcopal Church over slavery, and these people who are all named here would have had various roles at the 1920s in segregated Birmingham. So it would be really interested to know what their story was and how they were negotiating the story of race and religion when this monumental building was built. This is the Alabama Buddhist Vihara. And as you can tell, if you can read your flags, if they flutter enough, it's Buddhist and it's Sinhalese for people from Sri Lanka. So this is in the McDonald Chapel community, definitely off the beaten path, but not too far off the beaten path. And Theravadan Buddhist communities really begin with a place for the monk to live. And so that's what this place is all about. If you want to learn more about it, my students in World Religions the other semester did a fine little article on it which you can find at magiccityreligion.org, or follow the BHAM religion link, the BHM religion link to that Instagram account that I will tag here. Since it's on the way back to town from the Buddhist Vihara, I've stopped here at what used to be St. Mark's Roman Catholic Church, which was a center of the Italian Catholic community here in Birmingham. It was closed in, I think, around 1990 or in the 90s, but then a new St. Mark's Church was named for it, or carried the name down in Brooklyn. Race, Religion, and Ethnicity bicycle tour here in Birmingham, of course, has to take in 16th Street Baptist Church. Prominently located church, the first African-American Baptist church founded in Birmingham, and of course the scene of the bombing that killed 4 girls on September 15th, 1963. The Four Spirits Memorial to them is over on that corner in Kelly Ingram Park. But in terms of the overall history of the civil rights movement in Birmingham, one site we don't want to neglect is the church of this man, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, who was the prominent leader of the Alabama civil rights movement. Both his church, Bethel Baptist, and 16th Street will be profiled by students on Magic City Religion in the coming days. Remember what I said about railroad tracks and them forming barriers? Well, I'm here in Avondale, where the railroad tracks, as you can read about on Magic City Religion in our study of Avondale, form a major barrier. And right now there's a train passing through, and I can't get through to North Avondale, where I was planning on filming the stop, in front of 2 African-American churches that I plan to include, along with 2 historically white churches, on a tour of Avondale churches that I was supposed to give back on Palm Sunday 2020. Well, that didn't happen because of COVID, and it's not going to happen this year. Maybe I can work it into the fall course. That would be great. I'll be out of the country, hopefully, in 2022 at the London House, so we won't do it then. But Beloved Community Church, which has a mural behind me, they actually meet in the old Masonic Hall in front of me, was founded as an interracial church here in Birmingham around 1999. I'm now in Woodlawn. There are lots of stories about race and religion to tell here. The one that I'll mention centers around this, which was the firehouse. A historic firehouse that then the fire department outgrew, needed something more modern. And after being vacant for a while, it was bought by Alabama's largest megachurch. They might not have quite been there when they bought it, but Church of the Highlands now has maybe 30 sites throughout Alabama and tens of thousands of members. So they bought this as a center for mission in the inner city. And then they also began operating a satellite campus over here in Woodlawn High School. Now, a lot of local churches, African-American churches, did not like the way that the Church of the Highlands came in. Some did, probably, but it was sort of heavy-handed and they didn't make so much partnership. And so you can read all about that in lots of Birmingham news articles. Okay, I need to tell another story here. What you're looking at there was a building that was built as the First Baptist Church. Then they moved out to Liberty Park and it became a Church of God in Christ, African-American congregation. Back behind it is the Sunday school building of the Methodist Church. And the Methodist Church has remained in Woodlawn, the United Methodist Church, though their historic building burned and they built a new one. If we move over to the other side of the high school, we can see the old Christian church. They also moved out. And then there's the Episcopal Church, Grace, which is still here. It's interesting to think about what when the neighborhood changed, what historically white denominations moved out and which ones didn't. And the basic story is the more connectional ones across Birmingham, Methodists and Episcopalians, particularly Methodists, were more likely to stay, and the more independent ones, like Baptists, were more likely to move. I'm on one of the side streets in Woodlawn here at Allen Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church to say a word about cornerstones. If you ride around and have nothing better to do on a Saturday like I do and look at the cornerstones of old African American small churches, you will see they often have lots and they include lots of people's names. So here we see The first stone tells us the first church was built in 1887. It was rebuilt in 36. Then there's another memorial stone with more names, and I can't quite make out the date on that one right offhand. And then, as you might tell, this building is much newer. And so over on the other side, not in that lovely Alabama marble, though it seemed a little brittle, but in some more industrial granite here, we see the current, most recent stone. It seems really important for these churches to commemorate the names of those people who led them here in stone on these small churches. Another thing that you see on some, maybe about 30 of these historic African American churches, including small neighborhood churches like this one, Metropolitan Community Church, is this plaque, which commemorates that it was a mass meeting church for the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. That was the organization that Fred Shuttlesworth led, which was formed because the NAACP was outlawed in Alabama, and so the ACMHR was the substitute, or the replacement organization. So Metropolitan Community Church is here in the Woodlawn neighborhood, and they have one of those markers. It's significant probably that a lot of the AME churches, some of them were involved mass meeting churches, but it really was often not the top of the social ladder churches that were involved. This is Holy Rosary Roman Catholic Church in Gate City. I believe it is the oldest wooden church structure still standing in the city limits of Birmingham, though I'm not 100% sure on that. It's had many types of people. Many people have lived in Gate City over the years. It's largely a public housing development now, and the congregation here has been for years predominantly African American. One of my students, Isaac Johnson, is an organist, and for a while he served St. Barnabas in Eastlake and this church, which at the time were served by the same priest. Those of us who are cyclists know this church well because it's on Georgia Road, which is the easy old road out of Birmingham. Nobody else other than people who live in Gate City really know about this church at all.